Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under
You
Whisky.
said you were going to do it differently. You really did it differently. You did not lie.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, buddy.
How you doing, man?
I'm all right. How you doing?
I'm okay. I'm thinking about today's episode.
Okay. What are you thinking about today's episode?
Well, what I'm thinking is that it's, kind of like during Passover, you say, why is today different from every other day?
I remember the 4 questions.
Right? And I'm saying, why is today's episode different from every other episode of One Nation Under Whisky?
Well, it's spatially, temporally separate. But I think you're making a different point.
I am, but I'm glad that you're using some of your dictionary words. It's so interesting. There have been a few people I've been reading on the Facebooks, on our Single Cask Nation Facebook page, who said, I've been going back, listening to back episodes, and Ben Homan is one of the people who said this. And as they're talking, they're throwing out these words that are saying, now I get to use this word. It's like all of a sudden they go back to listen to our episodes and it's going to English class. Like conflab, that was the word, conflab.
All right.
Yeah.
That was a new one for Ben Homan in particular, or somebody else?
I'm going by memory. I don't feel like opening up Facebook. I'm going to assume that it was Ben Homan or it was someone else.
See, now you're coming around to my way of thinking. There's never a good reason to open Facebook. Unless.
Oh.
Unless.
All right.
Unless.
Okay.
It's to spend a few moments
Okay.
in the private, members-only, Single Cask Nation Facebook group.
It's a special place to be.
Lovely people.
It's an
Lovely,
oasis.
wonderful, generous, kind, thoughtful, sharing people.
Speaking of generous, kind, wonderful people, we got to meet and hang out with the one and only Will Oldham, a.k.a. Bonnie Prince Billy, live and in person.
We did with masks and social distancing. We got to meet him. We did not shake his hand. We did not hug him. We did not sit on his lap, nor he on ours. It was back porch all the way, and it was wonderful. Poured some drams, had some chat. Yeah, he was a good lad to talk to, because obviously he's thinking deeply about music and the music industry and the changing music industry. But there were many moments where he offered me a jumping off point to consider whiskey. And one of the things that I have been deeply contemplating since returning from our Kentucky trip is, what is whiskey for? On one hand, I think it depends to whom the question is asked.
Sure.
Because on one hand, I find myself sitting of a day, of an afternoon or of an evening, pondering whiskey, contemplating the whiskey in my glass, the colour, the nose, the texture, the palate, the finish. And I sometimes wonder if that experience is coming between me and the whiskey. Maybe whiskey is for drinking. Maybe it's simply for imbibing. Another aspect that I know I've become all too guilty of, and I'm going to rope you in here, so I'm not just throwing myself under the bus. I'm going to throw us both under the bus.
Oh, thank you.
Is that it's become all too easy to have whiskey as an ornament, right? If you walk into my office or you walk into your office, there are sample bottles that we're working through. There are open bottles of purchased whiskey that we're tasting and discussing and sharing and so on and so forth. But then there's also display whiskey, right? The whiskey that we say, I'm saving that for a special occasion, right? Which is one aspect of this. But I think there's another aspect, and you and I have talked to the nation about this. In buying in twos, There's the open bottle and the stored or the saved bottle. But there's also a part of me wonders if there's the open bottle and there's the ornamental bottle. And I really am not throwing you under the bus here. I'm just thinking out loud as we're recording here.
Okay.
You posted on social medias the other day that you had acquired a Kilchoman 14-year-old that was bottle number 2. And that was your backup Kilchoman 14. And now you're going to need a backup to your backup.
Yep.
Because you simply cannot open bottle number 2.
You cannot.
But that caused me to wonder, to contemplate deeper. Why not? Right? And that fostered my question of what is whiskey for? If we've now got bottle number 2, and I happen to own bottle number 11. I acquired mine in the Mid-Atlantic. I acquired bottle number 11, and you and I had said over text, well, bottle number 11's not getting opened, right?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't strike me that that's what whiskey is for. It's not ornamental. It shouldn't be ornamental, and yet, but we have bottles that are ornamental.
But I think certain numbers hold a certain importance, right? Think about the first bottle number 2 I'd ever received. Do you remember this? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Margaux cask, Glenmorangie.
No, it wasn't.
Glenmorangie. I'm sorry.
It wasn't the Margaux cask. It was the Truffle
No,
Oak.
it was the Truffle Oak.
Right, and so I saw the bottle on Abbey Whisky, and this was 2008, 2009. No, later than that. It was maybe a month or two, or maybe a year or two. I don't even remember at this point. From when Dr. Whisky, Sam Simmons, a.k.a. Dr. Whisky, wrote his review of the Glenmorangie Truffle Oak, and his notes were fascinating because, to make a long story short, he basically said the flavors were coming at such a fast pace. He was just throwing down a laundry list of flavors, and it was just like boom, boom, boom. It tastes like this and this and this and this, and it just sounded like a fascinating whiskey to me. And I loved the idea of Dr. Bill Lumsden trying out different kinds of oak to finish whiskey in. So I said, if Sam Simmons loves it, and my palate kind of aligned with his, then I need a bottle. And so I found this bottle on Abbey Whisky, and I ordered it, and then the email came in saying, your bottle's on your way. By the way, I think you're going to like the bottle number. And so I get it, and it's bottle number 2.
So even Mike Sharples knew what he was giving away, right? Store owner who said, I'm not going to hold on to bottle number 2.
What he did, right? Yes. And to make it even more so, he had to have known this. That bottle once belonged to Graham Ewanson, who was the distillery manager at the time.
Yep.
And it says it right on the bottom. It says Graham Ewanson on it. And so, and Mike sold it as a Graham Ewanson bottle. He sold it as bottle number 2. For him, it was a sale, and that's perfectly fine. But for me, as now the owner of it, there's something special because I quite like Graham Ewanson, right? Meeting him at Tomatin.
Oh, he's a lovely fellow.
Well, it was a wonderful experience meeting him and talking to him about that bottle. And so I don't think whiskey should be ornamental. However, there are fun stories connected with certain bottles. And with that one, with Truffle Oak, there's a story behind it. With this one, the Kilchoman, I don't know if there's necessarily a story behind it.
But here's the thing.
Okay, go ahead.
On one hand, you talk about the story, and I'm right there with you. I think that lineage is lovely. But why is the story contingent on the bottle being unopened? Why does the story not exist independently of the liquid inside, the cork being sealed on top? The story's the story.
The story's the story. The problem is a bottle, much like a $20 bill, loses its value once you open it. Once you once you bring that $20 bill to the cash register, and even if you're buying a water that's $1.50, you now have $18.50 that is much easier to spend than that $20 bill. And similarly, with a bottle you're hesitant to open, as soon as you open it, it's much easier to empty and go away. And for me, that's it. Like, somehow it means that will go away at some point. But if you keep it closed, you can live in the illusion that it won't go away anytime soon.
But you could also turn it into a lamp. We see people putting fairy lights into empty bottles and putting them on display and have it on your desk. And the story would still exist, and you would now have a lamp out of it as well.
Agreed. But listen,
you say that with such resignation in your voice.
I mean, you know,
he's talked me to a place where I have to agree.
Look.
My worst nightmare has come true. Yes.
You know my collection, and you know that I have a very, very, very small handful of bottles that are of the utmost importance to me, that will get opened in time. But I am nowhere near the end of my days, and I'll open them when I'm ready to open them. And until then, I'm happy to just show and share stories.
And please, don't take this as an attack on you. You're one of the most generous people I know when it comes to whiskey, and around your daughter's bat mitzvahs and special events and special times a year. You've told people, you've told me, head upstairs, find a bottle, open it, bring it downstairs. We'll enjoy it together. I'm definitely not throwing you under the bus here. I'm just curious because, neither one of us thought bottle 11 should be opened. And neither one of us thinks bottle 2 should be opened. And neither one of us thinks your Graham Unson Truffle Oak bottle should be opened. I'm just trying to get at the heart of why. Why shouldn't we do that? And I think it's an empty answer when we say, well, we're just going to sit on them a little longer. And I wonder about that. Look at this big collection that went up for sale earlier this year, where the chap in Colorado had been collecting, since the 90s and had some absolute remarkable bottles. And I just think that's a dude who died with a whole lot of really wonderful stories, wonderful bottles. And the story went, he was buying them 6 at a time, 8 at a time, and he was opening along the way, and he was sharing along the way, and he was living a whiskey life. At the end of the day, there was a massive collection went up for sale that had never been opened. And it just continues to feed into my question, what is whiskey for? Because I definitely think of us as being people, and I mean this as a fandom writ large.
Yeah.
We are people who save bottles for special occasions, for special reasons. To have a story presented to us on a shelf, to be able to tell other people those stories. And it just seems so tied to the liquid in the bottle with a sealed cork and a sealed capsule of some description that I'm trying to get to the heart, and I'm going to continue to ponder this on my lonesome. But there's something connected to the unopened bottle that heightens our appreciation, our guardedness, our protection, our historical nature. I don't know what the word is.
Well,
there's something there.
I'd like to continue this conversation until after our interview with Will, but I think there's a connection here. And I
hope so.
I think that it's tied to a particular preciousness, right? There's something about that bottle or a series of bottles that becomes precious to us for whatever reason. And I think there's a connection to some of what Will had mentioned in the interview. So I want to visit that after the interview, if you wouldn't mind. I do want to touch a little bit, before we hand it over to our conversation with Will, I want to touch a bit on why we have Will Oldham on the podcast. Okay, before we introduce him, I have a feeling, we have God knows how many listeners. I looked at the metrics, and we're looking at 40,000-ish, downloads or streams per month, maybe a bit more than that of our podcast. So there's, that, and that's across 115 episodes or so. So how many people that is, I don't know. But I would guess a fair few of those may not even know who Will Oldham is, which in some ways surprises me, but in some ways also does not surprise me. Because as a musician, he's a bit more esoteric than others. And, Will Oldham, for me at least, is someone I discovered, and we talk about this in the interview, is someone I discovered in the 90s and instantly fell in love with his music. And just like I am with guitar pedals and guitars, when I go down a rabbit hole, I'm collecting everything and I'm buying everything. And just like I was with whiskey, I'm going down that rabbit hole and discovering new whiskeys and new bottlings. And I was the same with, and still am, the same with Will Oldham's music, with the music of Bonnie Prince Billy. That's his stage name. And for me, it's difficult to explain why I'm so passionate about his music. And I think it's easier, perhaps, to maybe give our listeners some examples of songs, just snippets, to show people what I fell in love with out the gate, and maybe a bit of his newer music to show people why I'm still in love with his music. And I want to ask you to do the very same, because I know you've listened to Will Oldham and Bonnie Prince Billy and Palace, for just as long as I have, maybe even longer, because I know you've had some history with him or his music in university. But I want to put forward a little bit of a song from an album called Viva Last Blues. It's from when Will was playing under the moniker of Palace Music. And this song, and I'm just going to play about 20 seconds or so, this song is called New Partner. And it introduced to me a side of country-esque, alt-country. It didn't feel like country, but there were twinges of country in it. But it was just pure soul, pure feeling, and I fell in love with the song and his voice immediately. So I'm going to hand it over to Will and a little bit of New Partner. And then I'm curious what song touches you the most.
There's a black tinted sunset with the prettiest of skies. Lay back, rest your head on my thighs. There is some awful action that just breathes from my hand, just breaths from a deed so exquisitely grand. And you're always on my mind, and you're always on my mind, and you're always along my mind, and you're always along my mind. Well, I would not have.
Isn't that fucking beautiful?
It is. It really is.
The chorus, this chorus, this, up and down chorus was just, I remember when I first heard it and, being on tour with my old band, and we would just be driving down the road, and when that chorus came on, we would, all of us, be going, just up and down, and it was just so much fun to sing along with. And it came to me at this time when I'm 21, 22, 23 years old, something like that. Very, you know, I did a lot of growing in my early 20s, as I imagine a lot of people did. And that music just meant a lot to me. When I started gigging around with my band and discovering new music and getting out of the box that was punk and hardcore and just going to a music that I was a bit less familiar with.
For my selection, I picked Wolf Among Wolves, which is from the Master and Everyone album.
Yep.
Recorded as Bonnie Prince Billy.
Okay.
And I think you and I've spent enough time together on our travels that I really like singer-songwriter music. Mm-hmm. And so I really like Iron and Wine. I really like Cat Stevens. I've loved Cat Stevens.
Oh, yeah, you and me
so
both.
long.
Yeah, you and me both. It's wonderful.
Obviously, Johnny Cash and various iterations of Johnny Cash. And I could go on and on and on and on. But, and this comes up in the interview with Will as well, for me, Will Oldham is such a lyricist that the music is there for me to really shine a light on the lyrics. And I love the fact that in this song, the music doesn't in any way, shape, or form get in the way of the lyrics, but it just heightens how beautiful the composition is. And any time I'm moving through the world and this song comes on, I stop what I'm doing and I listen to this song. And this is why I want to share it with our listeners.
She holds a phantom, she kisses and she hugs him, and I am not averse to how she loves him. Why must I live and walk unloved as what I am? Why can't I be loved as what I am? A wolf among wolves and not as a man. Among men.
Did that live up to the advance billing? Was that suitably beautiful?
It was suitably beautiful, and to be honest, that is easily, if not my second, maybe my first favorite song on that entire album. I think the whole album fits. Yeah. It fits exactly what you were saying. That album is all about the lyrics. Not all about the lyrics, but it's pretty evident to me in Master and Everyone that the music, and it's similar, it's kind of the way we talk about whiskey, right? When we talk about the oak putting the spirit on a pedestal, I feel as if the music in Master and Everyone is putting the lyrics on a pedestal.
That is beautifully put. Right. Given that one of our running jokes is you saying, "How will I say this?" and me interjecting with the word "poorly," that was the exact opposite of that running joke. That was very well put, Joshua. I doff my cap to you, and I mean that in a very literal sense, as you just saw in the video.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I had one more song that I wanted to play, but I want our listeners, hopefully those songs give our listeners an understanding of what we've fallen in love with when it comes to Will's music. After we're done, I want to throw in one other song, and it's from his latest album that really excites me, that makes me very happy. Yes?
If you get one more, do I get one more? Or are you going to get two and I'm going to get one? The correct answer is we each get one.
We each get one. We each get one. But
Since you're deliberating there.
I just didn't want to. I didn't want to front load everything, Jason.
Oh no, I agree with you. Let's come back after the interview and play another couple of favorites or segments from another couple of favorites. And then we've also got the amazing music that we received from Will on the day.
Really special, right? Really special.
Well, chills stuff. And I don't know if I'm going to say too much here on... let's come back. I'm going to say this after we come back from the interview. So should we jump into the interview? Has it been long enough? Are we ready to hear from the wonderful Will Oldham?
I think we are ready. Firstly, thank you for having us.
Thanks for coming, being here.
Cheers.
Thanks for the whiskey.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure, and I realize that you've got a child to pick up in a little bit, so we're not going to get you too drunk.
Good.
Just maybe happy.
Okay.
I mentioned in the email, like I've been a fan of yours for too long. I remember back in the mid '90s, buddies who had introduced me to Slint had said, "Oh, you got to check out this other thing called Palace Music, or maybe it's Palace Brothers. I don't remember. You have to." Someone made me a tape, and played it for me, and I remember before I got it, I said, "Well, what is it? Is it hardcore? Is it like what is it?" And they said, and I'll never forget this. And they said it's some crazy Kentucky shit. I don't know. I'm like, okay, cool. And so I remember listening to it and just falling in love. Like it was weirdness that I was getting into at the time.
Yep.
Like at that time, I was discovering fucking lawnmowers.
Yeah.
And well, let's hope the SM58s don't.
The yards
fail us.
aren't that big around here, so it can't last too long.
So at that time, I was getting into Bell and Sebastian, and some of these other. Like I was calming down in my own tastes, but it was Palace Brothers / Palace Music that I clung to and continued to cling on to as you transformed into Bonnie Prince Billy and continue to this day. And so, and just add a little more, put a few more branches on this tree, leaves on the branches. I just recently watched the Slint documentary,
Breadcrumb Trail.
Yeah, right. And I knew that you were connected to them.
Yeah.
But I also had no idea, or I didn't have an idea that some of those guys played with you early on.
Oh yeah.
So what I'm trying to get to is like your music it's not at odds to what they were doing, but it was definitely a sidecar to what they were doing. It's just different.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious where that spark of yours came from to be doing something so very different than what perhaps some of your other peers were doing in those earlier days.
Yeah. Well, what they were doing, and it's with each passing year, it's harder to tell how unique what they were doing was, because you start to take for granted sounds that have just become, if not commonplace, at least accepted.
Yeah.
But at the time, what they were doing was unique. And didn't have any. I remember the first iteration of Slint. There was a different bass player. It was Ethan Buckler instead of Todd Brashear.
Yep.
And it might have been their first, or if it wasn't their first, it was an early show in Chicago at a Thai restaurant called Bangkok with Jesus Lizard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And being in the bathroom and someone saying, "So what's the deal with this Slint band from Louisville?"
Yeah.
And the other guy at the other urinal said, it's like they're essentially Yes, but they've never even heard Yes.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And I can sort of, it's just in terms of just not being able to put your finger on something, maybe that's a decent way of opening one's brain before you start listening. But most of what they did happened, as you could see in that Breadcrumb Trail doc, to a great extent. I think that's a really good movie. in the practice room.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that got carried outside of the practice room.
Yeah.
Like, we all listened to music together, and we didn't listen to any music that seemed related to that music, except for, I think one thing that they did do extremely well was tap into that really unique individual experience that we all have with music that is revelatory to us. You put it on whatever record, and you have this specific relationship to that music that nobody in history has ever had before.
Mm-hmm.
And they figured out a way of, at least for a while, to translate that experience into, so it's like, they're listening to Killdozer and Big Black and Leonard Cohen and Neil Young, and having these very specific individual experiences, and then translating it into something so that when you or I hear what they're doing, we hear that magical chemical uniqueness that wouldn't translate if they played a song that sounded like Crazy Horse or something like that. It'd just be like, oh, well, this is that.
Exactly.
But it's not that. This is our experience of that.
Yeah.
This is our translation of that, or of Hank Williams or whatever. Yeah, so, and I didn't play any music at all during any of that time. Like when we were friends in high school, I took pictures. I just had a camera. And
you didn't tinker at all?
No.
Okay.
I was in the theater a lot, and I had to do vocal training and sometimes sing a song in the course of that work, but I was into music in the way that those guys were into music, but it just never occurred to me to want to play it or to try to play it. And then it wasn't until I think I started to learn an instrument when I was 19, and they were beginning to unravel as a band, and then I didn't necessarily, like Britt has an incredible, and Paho, like those two guys specific, each of those individuals has special powers, but Paho and Britt have really special musical powers, and not that Brian and Todd and Ethan don't, but just the intricacy of their relationship to music is strong.
Like a thought process?
Like a thought process, or I think Britt was insanely disciplined, on top of having a uniquely creative brain. He was insanely disciplined, and then Paho is one of those people who just, he hears music and he sees it, he can break it down, and he can sit behind a drum kit and he can play the drums.
Okay.
He can play the bass. He can play, he can just do it. Not that he doesn't practice and it doesn't take a lot of work, but I think he hears something and his brain breaks it apart different than my brain breaks something apart. Like he'll break something apart, whereas my brain continues to see things as a whole. And so then I think when I began to approach playing music, I continued to see it always as a whole thing, which kept me from ever, or for a long time, from being able to find the benefit of becoming specifically inclined towards one aspect of the discipline, which ended up being singing and lyrics. So writing lyrics and singing lyrics, and then continuing to look at the big picture like a movie producer would look at a motion picture or something like that.
Gotcha.
So we had all these shared experiences, all these shared tastes, but I think I kind of really got into playing music because I learned that that's what I'd devoted so much of my energy towards up to that point in life, and saw that it was a huge world that could never potentially be exhausted. I realized that it would be foolhardy to start over from scratch and try to learn some kind of other trade.
Yeah.
It was reverse engineering and thinking like, well, I care about nothing in the way that I care about music, so I should probably, and I know how it's built and I know how it's produced, and so I should see what I can do about making some, I guess. Something like that.
Yeah, but by comparison, what you were producing had a markedly different sound.
I guess so.
Right? and like you could hear some of the like when I and this is just me rewinding the clock back to 20-something Joshua, right? And listening to it, and I would hear, and I was a punk and hardcore kid, straight edge, the whole thing. And I remember listening to it and saying, he made what kind of sounds like country really fucking cool.
Uh-huh.
And I loved how you did it. And I always wondered, well, not always, but a bit more recently now, but I wondered like where that came from. If your local group of friends were playing heavier stuff and like crazy Yes, and they didn't know it was Yes and all this, and you took different routes seemingly. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly.
No, you are, but it isn't. That's so much the outsider perspective.
Yeah, there you go.
It's kind of what I'm trying to.
Yeah.
Because also, even when the first Palace Brothers record came out, and there started to be reactions to it, talking about it as country at all or Appalachian at all.
Yeah.
That was a real mind fuck. I didn't,
you didn't get that comment?
No,
okay. Yeah.
that was not, like there's a banjo on the record because a friend of mine who's has an amazing brain played the banjo.
Yeah.
And he needed to be a part of this thing, and so there's a banjo on it. Mm-hmm. But
right, yeah, that's it. Yeah,
that's kind of it.
Here's what I have to bring to the table.
Yeah, and I've tried to understand people's conception of it being because, like I say, because we had so many shared musical experiences and feelings about music. Talking about music, going to see music, participating in music in one way or another. It felt like the goals were, if not the same, at least very, very parallel.
Yeah.
And their abilities, like I say, I didn't have a brain like Paho or Britt.
Yeah.
But it's trying to still do the best that you can possibly do with the raw materials that God and the world has given us. So in that way, it seems like it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as you're explaining it, I'm thinking about, and I'm not going down this tangent, but I'm just thinking about religion, right? Everybody has, not everybody, but there's a monotheistic idea of God, and Jews have this approach.
Yeah.
And the final destination is X. Christians have this approach, and the final destination is also X, but the routes are slightly different.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And religion plays its part in music, but how much of that, part of it is just that we live in a world in which religion is just part of language. And it seems like being, claiming atheism cuts a person off from a hell of a lot of culture. Whether, it does define one's, somebody as, well, I'm not of this religious group, but it also says that, a lot of people, because they've been so traumatized oftentimes by religion, so there's a legitimate reason for it, but they push, they don't allow anything that smacks of religion into their, now the hummingbird's back right behind you. It's so beautiful. See it?
Oh, I see it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And those flowers are just made for it.
Aren't their feet too small and weak for them to stand?
They perch, but I don't know.
Oh, do they perch? Oh, okay.
I feel like I saw one perch for the first time within the last year, and I always didn't know if they could ever rest.
Oh my gosh.
But they have to be able to sit down somewhere.
Yeah, right? Take a break.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Sit on an egg? Do they sit on eggs?
Sure.
I think they have to, right?
I don't know. Nobody has to do anything. That's one thing my daughter says now. Have to? If you say something,
that's
she's
funny.
Have to?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, my oldest daughter is now 14, right around that same age, 1.5 to 2 years. She would say, because she would want to know what we're doing, if we're in the other room doing something, and she would come in the room and she'd say, "Doing."
Yeah.
Oh, see?
Yeah.
I love these. I love rewinding the clock.
Yeah.
Just thinking about those things.
Yeah.
So in terms of rewinding the clock and somewhat selfishly for me, I was reading that some of your seed in music came from Scotland.
Yeah.
Came from being over there, experiencing folk music.
Yep.
And even having a friend make a tape.
Multiple tapes, yeah.
Right. And so, on one hand, I'm curious, what was it like for you growing up in Kentucky and being surrounded by such wonderful, rich history in Kentucky? And then what was it like for you having that kind of moment, experiencing Scotland through Scottish folk music?
Yeah. For whatever reason, one thing that I was always attracted to field recordings of traditional musics, because I always, I think partly from growing up in a vibrant music scene and spending so much time at house shows or basement band practices, and getting my rocks off so hard from music that just people were playing, and then you do what? You eat pizza, you walk down the street together, you go to school, you listen to music, talk about music, just thinking like, well, music is, to me, only essentially valuable in the way that it applies to an individual's life. And so oftentimes you listen to records, and of course they're made in these weird cultural vacuums called recording studios. Mm-hmm. And they're almost designed to be, universally applicable and to not carry any baggage with them. And so I always liked music that was related to people's lives. So I ended up going to the library and finding whatever I could find that were field recordings of traditional musics. And there's a lot of that are profoundly effective and beautiful and hypnotic and inspiring, but I also love a lyric. And so I'm looking then for things that are sung in English, because there's lots of beautiful Bengali singing, Japanese singing, and Aboriginal vocal noises and singing, but there's I don't know what's going on here. I don't know. And then and Scotland was, and you might just say because it just is, but for some reason I found it to be more inspiring or beautiful or engaging than, say, English folk music.
Sure.
Makes sense. Made him very happy. You made him very happy.
And then as well, like there was a theater company that I was involved with here, and the woman who ran it had a relationship with Scotland, and at one point when I was 12, she said, "Let's go. We'll rent this big house in Glen Lyon outside of Aberfeldy, and we'll go visit various places." We were traveling also with a playwright named John Peelmeyer, who at the time was working on a one-man play about J.M. Barrie, which ultimately was called Courage, and it's a really good play if you ever find it. So we visited J.M. Barrie's house, and we visited Burnham Wood, the tree, the last tree from Burnham Wood from Macbeth. And that was my first time out of the country. I was 12, like I say, I was with my family, but also with these theater folks, and we were there in the middle of, the middle of Scotland, kind of. It kind of is almost the middle of Scotland, and started to, but at the same, we went to Cayley's, and and so then that was one of the first places where I was able to see music that wasn't American music played in, as a part of people's lives, like a Cayley happened and everybody went in where we were.
Sure.
And that was just tremendously exciting. At the same time, it was hard to find access to music where the music actually was like felt, resonant and current, either because it was just older people singing, or the cassettes you could find in the tourist shops were just the most basic renditions.
Not great.
And yet I knew that the music was obviously so rich that music was there. Even I was guessing that there were going to be modern recordings of 100, 200, 300-year-old songs that would be profoundly effective, but I wasn't sure how to find them. And ultimately, so we had rented this big house, and the gilly. You know what a gilly is?
No, weird and gilly.
A gilly, I would call a gilly like a groundskeeper.
Yes, exactly. Oh, so the gilly of the gilly. So the Gillies family lived next door to this big house that we all situated ourselves in, which was, I think, like a hunting lodge in season, but it was out of season. And there were boys, 3 boys. The oldest, I think, is now a banker and has been a banker for a long time, but he greeted us with pipes, in full dress.
Whoa.
And then the middle son, so I went back when I was 17, I guess, and hitchhiked around, went back to visit the family, the Gillies family, and the middle son had become deeply involved with music, not a musician. He's still, like, now he booked a theater in Aberdeen for a long time. He books a theater in Perth now, runs a festival in Perth.
Okay.
We re-encountered ourselves in our late teens, and I was able to put the questions to him. I was like, I'm suspecting that there is amazing Scottish music. Where is it? And he's like, well, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I'm just interested in, like, I know Robert Burns is probably cooler than I can figure out, and I know that bagpipes are a cooler instrument than we often hear them to be. And so yeah, he was just like, "Oh, give me £5 and I'll send you some music." And yeah, he ended up sending 6 months later, like, all this music, and is still a friend to this day. Who's like, I've done shows with him now, and that helped cement for me, like, one of the big blessing curses of my life is how incredible my musical life has, fortunately been, in that, I did grow up in this city that had a magnificent and supportive and interesting and eclectic music community that is, still decades later still continues to inspire and is like my family,
Nice.
And that I happened to meet, Andy Shearer, who could show me that my my thoughts were correct in terms of, where I could find satisfaction in a modern approach to traditional Scottish music, and Scottish and Irish, because he was way into Scottish. He's way into Scottish and Irish music,
okay.
And he was a wonderful teacher, because when he sent me the cassettes, he also sent me pages and pages of notes on every song, where he had sourced the recordings, who the singer was, where the song came from.
Wow, that's serious.
Yeah, it's serious. And there have been so many things along those lines that have happened that it's kept my expectations and my standards extremely high, which means that, I'm frequently disappointed, but at the same time, I'm frequently rewarded. So I keep thinking, like, the next reward is just around the corner.
Sure. Just to close out that thought, in almost discovering yourself through that experience of Scottish music, did that cause you to reflect on being the Kentucky fellow, the Kentucky chap that you were, or that you were becoming?
It did, especially because, I think my conversation with Andy began because his folks had come to visit Kentucky, because we all became friends with the Shearers, the Gilly family. And they had come here. I think there was like a screening of this movie that I was in the 80s called Matewan, which is about West Virginia mining wars. And they were here for that, and they had asked for if I would make them a mixtape of Kentucky music. So I made them a mix, and that wasn't necessarily my forte, but I did have my things that I was into.
Yeah.
And when I went to their house, and fortunately he was there, he had, absconded with their cassettes that I'd made for them, and he, was really excited about them. And realizing, when you live somewhere, you just that's who you are. And then when you go other places, you realize, oh, that's who I am.
Exactly.
At least to other people, or at least in some sense, I am that person. And understanding that it's a job to make that, a fruitful and productive aspect of your identity.
Sure.
For your own self as well.
For sure, yeah.
Like, oh, well, this is something that I was born into, and I can own it, and it may take work, like it's, but it might be easier to do that in Kentucky than, I don't know, than it might be in Missouri, for example.
Yeah. The reason that it kind of appeals to me and captures my imagination is I never visited a Scottish distillery until I'd moved to the United States full time. And it was that realization of it's always easy to look outside of yourself. And I always wanted to live in the United States. And once I'd moved here, it gave me a chance to explore what I'd left behind. And so now getting to go home, with the company gives me that chance to pick up the thread that I just simply dropped and didn't really value. And so you can imagine growing up in Scotland, Scottish folk music isn't that appealing.
Oh, of course.
The same way that a lot of Scots people are growing up with no interest in whiskey.
Right.
And so that's why I'm curious about that parallel where I was in Scotland not really paying attention to whiskey, although it was always around, but it was always rock gut. And here you were growing up in Kentucky, surrounded by whiskey.
Yeah.
And did you have much attention on the whiskey that you were growing up amongst, or was that just another thing that another generation did?
It was like you. I didn't partake for most of, until I was maybe 19. It just sort of happened. Like every once in a while for a lark, I would put a permanent marker X on my hand. Like we thought it was like funny.
Yeah.
Funny. It was like funny cool.
Yeah.
Which I guess developed into being called ironic in the following decade.
Exactly.
But at the same time, it was like I got so high off of music that I was just like, why? I mean, I don't understand why this group of kids is wanting to drink when, the drinking doesn't seem as fun as turning this music up. Like this music, what's better than this? There's nothing better than this. And when I started to get a taste for whiskey, it was interesting because then I would go to Europe and play shows in the 90s, and there wasn't a lot of bourbon available. Usually you go and go like, say, what kind of bourbon do you have? And they would say, we have Jack Daniels. I mean, that was the answer most of the time. And if it wasn't Jack Daniels, it was Jim Beam or this mysterious bourbon called Four Roses, which didn't really exist on the shelves here at that time.
Okay.
But I remember going to the Maker's Mark distillery in the 90s and thinking, that it was a beautiful and fascinating place. I haven't been since then. I don't know if it's still a beautiful and fascinating place.
It is.
It is. Yeah, that's cool.
It's gorgeous.
And I remember like moving to Alabama for a little while, and it was fun to explore the bourbons that were available. Yeah, because basically thinking about drinking hard alcohol was just pretty much thinking about drinking bourbon. Mm-hmm. Because the scotches I had like J&B and Dewar's were okay, but it didn't make me want to buy a bottle, for example.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah. That was what we knew about, or potentially what was available. I have no idea. I mean, definitely the whiskey selection was pretty limited. I remember getting really excited by J.W. Dant because it had the most beautiful. Do you know that bourbon?
I don't.
I've heard of it.
It's got one of the most beautiful labels, and I think that it still exists, but I don't know. I haven't. It had a what do you call it? The label is embossed, and it has 4 kernels of corn as part of their logo. Oh, okay. It's maybe 3 red kernels and a yellow kernel in 4 points, like of the compass.
Yeah.
And those are embossed and raised, and the J.W. Dant is in a beautiful script, and it's raised, and it was a 100 proof bourbon.
Okay.
That I remember, drinking in Alabama in the 90s. I'd be interested to hear what the experience of visiting a Scottish distillery was and is, especially in comparison to what's going on in Kentucky. Because what's going on in Kentucky is, I don't think it's cool, especially the way that it's affected. Like the contrast is so huge right now as our mayor and different people in power around the state have invested so much in this bourbon boom and seeing downtown now is a ghost town.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because resources were misallocated, to say the least, and just this idea of I was curious when there was a coalition of some Scottish distilleries in the 90s. It was like Lagavulin, Talisker, Oban, and there was one more, right? There were like 4 that I would always see on display.
Glenkinchie and Cragganmore, I want to say.
Yeah.
Was there a Mac? Was there no? Okay. No. I didn't remember those.
Yeah, it would have been Macallan.
Yeah.
But what you had was the traditional company of Highland distillers became or merged with what would become Diageo. And so then you had those exact distilleries became really the crown jewels of Scotland's distilleries.
Because Diageo owned all of those distilleries. So
and they were legitimately established distilleries.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
But then
200-year-old distilleries,
was there like so there was this a graphic designer that came in and sort of linked them as well?
So yes. So what they tried to do was, and it it was to the good of the Scotch industry, was at a time when single malt was just trying to get its footing, and so 90s Scotland, single malt is just trying to get its footing. Diageo came out with this classic malts line, and it became all of the marketing around those 6 distilleries, where if you then came to Scotland, because of the regions that they occupied, if you travelled around Scotland, you would invariably get to hit each of those distilleries. Now,
and what was the experience like of hitting one of those distilleries?
So, at the time they were doing it, well, Cragganmore, I think had only just created a visitor centre for that experience. And so it was a distillery that you wouldn't have previously been able to visit or explore in any way.
Yeah.
And so it started to...
Well, you wouldn't have been able to visit or explore in any way. But, like, this is something that, like, I've always found that there's a little bit of tragedy whenever anything gets some of its income from tourism, you know, something beautiful, like the state of Hawaii or a great distillery. And so what would have happened if you just were like, this is my favorite whiskey, I'm going to go there, I'm going to knock on the door and say, would you show me around? Would they say no, or would they be like, oh, sure, come in?
They would have.
Yeah.
In the 80s and the early 90s, they would have looked at you like you'd lost your mind, and then they would have brought you in and showed you around quite happily.
Yeah. And would it have felt like a factory, or what would it have felt like?
There would have been a factory aspect to it. I think those who manage distilleries understand that they're operating factories and producing product. It's the marketing departments of larger, conglomerations that are in charge of selling romanticism and selling an image. Whereas those who simply run it can be very proud of what they're running, but they're not running a tourist-facing business. They're running a factory that produces a product. And so to answer your question, those who became part of the classic malts, to some extent, you see a Disneyfication. And that's something we hear about Kentucky as well. Right? There's a Disneyfication happening where you go for the experience. But the experience
is completely manufactured.
Correct.
Well, here it's completely manufactured.
Correct.
But is it completely manufactured? That's what. Is there a foundation for the romanticism surrounding Scottish distilleries?
In certain distilleries in Scotland, you will absolutely get the Disneyfication of Scotch. But then... And this is those who are doing the combination of factory and tourism well are still selling something legitimate, right? And so if you go to Kilchoman on Islay, you've got a farmhouse distillery that you really have to traverse the island after you've traversed the water, after you've traversed the mainland, right? You really have to want to get there. And once you get there, yes, they've got a fantastic tea room. Yes, you can get a tremendous sandwich, but you can also see a farmhouse distillery that's showing you how this used to be done. And that to me is the meeting point where you get a legitimacy along with the understanding that it's tourism that's oftentimes paying your bills, hiring the majority of your staff, getting people to make it all the way to your distillery. So in Scotland, you know Scots, we're a pragmatic people. There's that understanding that...
There's another thing I love about Scotland.
Thank you. There's that understanding that, yes, you can have your romance and yes, you can have your traditions, but if you're not living in this moment right now, and understanding that we've lost industry and we need tourism, then you're making a mistake. And so it's that pragmatic mind that combines tourism with something legitimate at the heart.
Yeah.
And you know, there are distilleries in Kentucky that have cracked that code as well.
To some extent. I mean, we're the glut right now is all of these manufactured histories, you know, and new, you know, you can't tell if a, you know, advertising company has created this ridiculous Kentucky name, or if they just looked through the criminal records of the mid 19th century and said, you know, Hezekiah Bucketsmith, that sounds like a great name for a bourbon. Let's pretend that it existed. Or it's one guy who made 10 terrible bottles.
But here's the thing, Will. If you read Fred Minnick's book on bourbon, that's always been bourbon. There hasn't been bourbon outside of that. And so when I, you know, obviously being a Scotsman moving to America and having this level of frustration with that, where I wanted to get access to the distillery, right? Just tell me about the distillery. Don't dress it up. And reading Fred's book, bourbon has always been built on the back of stories and branding and marketing. And you've had very few distilleries that have put out one singular name distillery product. It's always been on the back of marketing.
So when you say always and then compare it to Scotch whiskey, like Scotch whiskey, these are distilleries / factories that were creating something that people just drank, right? And was bourbon differently?
Yeah, blended away into those things that you and I never drank.
Yeah, but I mean, like, was bourbon always like a product designed to be marketed, or was it also a pragmatic thing that people just like, this is a distilled beverage that tastes halfway decent and makes me feel all right?
I think you could argue both.
Yeah.
Right. I think you could argue there was, again, that smaller, number who were having that pragmatic experience. But if you wanted to sell your bourbon across the state of Kentucky or across the South or across the nation, then you better have a story to go along with it.
But early on, it was completely different. Early on, it was just an agricultural product.
That's what I would have thought, yeah.
You had people coming over from Scotland, from Ireland, from Wales, coming over to carry on the agricultural heritage that they had over there. There wasn't, the whole marketing idea is very new. It's so new, at least newish.
Define new, Define
so
new.
Let me give an idea. So when we talk about Scotch whiskey, we typically talk about single malt. And that, if you talk about Scotch, people say, well, single malt, that's the creme de la creme, right? That's, you like your Lefroy, he likes his Lagavulin, so on and so forth. But it wasn't until the late 50s to mid 60s that a single malt brand was even marketed. They were all distilleries making malt whiskey to go into your Johnny Walkers, to go into your Chivas or your Ushers or what have you.
Oh, and I love my Johnny Walker Black.
Right?
That's one of my favorite all-time
And so you had 30-plus distilleries producing whiskey that Diageo would bring in to create your Johnny Walker Black.
Yeah.
And most people never even heard of these distilleries.
Right.
To this date, you've got about 130 distilleries in Scotland, and maybe 60 to 70 of them produce a single malt that's marketed, bottled, sold as a single malt. The rest of them just produce, they're a factory that produce malt whiskey that go into some sort of a blend. Yeah.
And I mean, thinking about Johnny Walker Black and the way that it makes me feel, is there's another thing that I've wondered about with the beer boom, or with any, of the various wine movements throughout my life, or this. I marvel at the fact that there isn't a lot of discussion, or I don't hear it, maybe you guys do, but about choosing your whiskeys based on the specifics of the emotions or energies that they provoke in your own self. And because I've always found, like, the Johnny Walker Black is just like, if I'm lost and don't know what to do with myself and I'm out on the road somewhere, I just know, like, if I drink that for the next 5 or 6 hours, everything is going to be just fine. It just does, like, it clarifies me and energizes me, and then I forget about it. Like, I forget it exists for months at a time, and then it's just like,
interesting.
My go-to Lefroy 10 years is a similar thing. It's just like, as soon as I have a sip of it, my whole body recognizes it.
Exactly.
And And I don't, and I wish that makers of, and I know it's probably depends on internal body chemistry, so you can only rely on that to a certain extent.
But you're starting to talk to something that Joshua and I have been talking about, which is the contextual nature of imbibing. Right, which is there's something about you being somewhere on the road that Johnny Walker Black speaks to you in that moment because it has spoken to you previously, and you're revisiting that context.
I guess I don't know how much of it is chemical and how much of it is contextual, though.
Yeah,
that's what my question is: how much of it is chemical? Like there are certain bourbons that might make me unhappy right away.
Oh,
right away.
Oh, okay,
sure.
And it's just like
and it's not connected to bad experiences.
No, you don't realize it until 10 minutes in, you just think like, I'm heading down the wrong road right now. But related to the last thing, when do you imagine like the first print or the first wave of print advertisements for Scotch whiskies were? 100 years ago, or not at all?
Yeah, first print. You've actually got. You mentioned Aberfeldy earlier. It was Dewar who led the path on that. And I want to say, and I only read this at the distillery last year. I would hate to put a date on it, but I would say 100 years would be pretty fair. He was also a chap who was going down to London, walking into a bar completely unknown, asking if they had Dewars, and then if they did, he would order it and then proclaim how fantastic it was to those around him. And if they didn't, ask them to bring it in.
Yeah.
And so he was a crafty marketer.
Right.
And so him putting posters out there, advertisements out there of some description.
And were single malts, were you saying that they weren't even available, or they just weren't discussed or talked about?
They were available, not with any regularity, but it wasn't until the late 50s, early 60s that the Glenlivet, it was the Glenlivet, right? Not Glenfiddich?
I thought it was Glenfiddich, but you're running with Glenlivet.
Yeah, see now, here's some...
So it's like the 30s and the 40s, were there single malt connoisseurs that were just weirdos that were...
No,
because it was rot gut, right? The reason you were blending it is because you needed a flavor profile that people wanted to drink, right? You were sanding out the rough edges by bringing multiples together, and it was only... And you see this in everything, music, food, booze. You see that pendulum move where, okay, the blends are getting better, blends are very good, I'm enjoying my blend, but what would it be like if you deconstructed this?
Yeah.
What if we actually pulled out the components of the blend? What would that be like?
So which came first, a quality single malt or the desire to have a quality single malt?
You would have to say the desire to have it. I don't think, even if it was being lost in a blend, I don't think it was showing up in people's glasses, right? For people to say, we should have more of this. Instead, I think it was...
So you think a distiller would be like, I'm selling all this stuff, but I'm keeping the really good... I'm just sitting at home at the end of the day and I drink my own this.
So that fits a little bit with what you were saying about what if you showed up at a distillery pre-visitor center. The distillery manager, if you were lucky, would bring you into his office and he would just pour you cask samples. And he would say, I've got this and I've got this. And
might people who live within a 10-mile radius of that distillery be drinking the same thing? Or no, not at all?
Well, we do know about Christmas time.
Where they would
they were
treat the community, you mean?
Yes.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I enjoy going to Scotland in January time is if you're in the right place at the right time and you know the right person, they say, "Oh, we've got some whiskey for you," and they'll take out a bottle of Iron Brew. And in that bottle of Iron Brew,
or a milk jug,
we have a friend who works at a distillery who has another friend that works at another distillery, and they just had a few jugs of.
But this brings us to what I wanted to get at with context. And do you want to pour the unlabeled sample here?
Yeah. This is something we haven't bottled. I don't want to rush you.
I thought it was empty. From my angle, it looked empty. It's
just pale.
Gotcha.
We're switching over to rye whiskey.
Oh, good.
So this one is a 14-year-old MGP rye, and it spent the last 6 weeks or so in Tokai casks, so Hungarian dessert wine.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Dean Spanley? Do you know this movie, Dean Spanley? It's Tokai figures prominently in the plot.
What does?
Tokai.
Oh, okay.
It's Sam Neill and Peter O'Toole.
Oh, okay.
And it's hard to define what kind of movie it is. It's kind of a one-of-a-kind thing, but I would guess maybe 15 or 20 years, something like that. It was one of Peter O'Toole's last movies, and when you see him walking on the screen, you just think, like, why did they do this to this poor old man? But by the end, it's like Lawrence of Arabia and Dean Spanley are like the two Peter O'Toole movies that I think of now.
Okay.
But the Dean Spanley character is certain crucial reveries are triggered by certain vintages of
Tokai.
Of Tokai. Specifically, it's like Tokai that was made for the Hungarian royal family, so it has to be a imperial Tokai. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so
that's awesome.
I still never tried it, but it figures prominently in my romantic landscape.
Oh, yeah. Well, this will get you
this
close.
Is from Tokai.
Yeah, enjoy this. So
Tokai.
Yeah,
Cask.
so 14 years and just a new barrel, and then about 6 weeks or so in the Tokai casks.
And where did that happen?
Have you heard of Whistle Pig? You know Whistle Pig, right? So distilled in Indiana, and
it's okay. It's fine.
That's fine. They mature in upstate New York because they're based out of Vermont, but they warehouse just over the border in New York. And then when they're ready to do something with the whiskey, they bring it into Vermont, and then they start just playing around with it. And so we've got another release that is rye finished in vermouth casks and rum casks, and just it changes the flavor in such a beautiful way. So you'll get like such lovely sweetness out of this. It's about 50% alcohol.
57 on this.
57.
Oh yeah, that's really good.
57.7 on this. 114, 115 proof for those proof scorers at home.
So Whistle Pig, they both distill, but then they do, what a lot of the other brands do. They buy whiskey from this big distillery in Indiana. They put it in their bottle, and hey, here's Whistle Pig's whiskey. Meanwhile, they didn't make it, but they're honest about where they get it. They're honest about how they finish it and so forth. They're more transparent. And so in this case, it's an odd collaboration of a distillery that purchased someone else's whiskey that wants to work with an independent bottler ourselves. Yeah. It's this weird, convoluted family tree to get this into a bottle.
Yeah. But all with full transparency.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that I'm intrigued by with you is your and you might not use the word hatred, but maybe you will. Your serious dislike for digital media and the Shopify. I did this the other day.
Shopify.
I did this the other day with
good enough. Good enough name.
I did this the same, right? Spotify. And my kid's a big SoundCloud user, and I wanted to explore that with you because in listening to you in this conversation, I'm getting that sense of authenticity from you. Yeah. This sense of legitimacy.
Right.
That you want to get back to the very heart of something, and that is the heart you want to explore, not the outer kernel that could have been manufactured in some way, or maybe not. And I was curious how that reflects on your music.
Yeah.
Where in listening to you, and again, I'm going to use another word that you may or may not like, but I get a sense of the minstrel tradition from you. And I mean that in the UK sense, not the American sense, of the traveling minstrel, right? And you talk about being a lyricist.
Yeah.
And I think your music is so wonderfully lyric driven with just a subtle framing from the music behind it.
Yeah.
That would you prefer to be somebody who's only in cities playing your music for people who are sitting in front of you? Is that the context that you want for your music? And is that what digital media gets in the way of? Or is something else happening entirely?
It doesn't, because, in talking about, those experiences that we all had with recorded media growing up and still ideally, it's those are powerful experiences that are not any worse than many of your most powerful experiences having live music played right in front of you. So there's no reason to, discount that or vilify it in any way. But I was when you all were describing, I think it was before we turned the microphone on, you were describing some of your processes and how you relate to distilleries and how you come up with your collaborations. And something popped into my head about one reason why I do dislike Shopify. And that is, because a parallel to some of the, motivations and the ways that I approach getting my work done, has direct relationships to the way you all were describing your relationship to your work. In that, and what, Shopify negates this completely is, like when we were looking to finally put a large portion of the catalog on that hadn't been on until about a year and a half or 2 years ago. I was like, well, this is okay if we can, even in the metadata, like put all of the, the songwriters and the various musicians on there, and that way someone could search and we were looking into it, and that's impossible. You can't do that.
Wow.
Why is that impossible? Is it a lot of information? No.
Yeah.
It's because it's divide and conquer. It puts too much power into the hands of the listeners. A huge motivator for doing what I do, in addition to wanting to do something that, to make a living that I have some facility at and have some experience with, is to interact with other people who make music or appreciate music, alive or dead. And there's so many different ways of doing that. You can do covers of songs, and you're talking about, like, I like to play with certain musicians, collaborate with certain musicians who I have an intense admiration for, partly because I want to be in the same room with them and I want to pick their brain and I want to see what, how, can I keep up with them? What can I learn from them? And then there's obviously certain times when it's like, well, I also want to increase the strength of my musical community by introducing someone who may know what I do but doesn't know what this woman does that I want to sing with, and then they hear her and then they might buy her records, or to cover somebody's songs or do whole records of covers of somebody's songs. It's like, I don't know enough people who are, conversant with the music of Merle Haggard for whatever reason. Of course, there are millions who are, but I want some people who are maybe actively involved in a certain kind of experimentation or collaborative music playing to realize, like, this guy is, he's great, but you don't really know that he's great. He's actually great, like all caps, not just one cap and not just, lowercase letters. He's great. And that's not, if I do a cover of even, Mama Tried and it's on Shopify, they don't say this is a Merle Haggard song.
Okay.
That's evil.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you.
Because it's easy data. They could put it on there.
Yeah.
You don't know the songwriters. They don't identify the songwriters. They don't even identify the record that is. So if an artist made a concept record in 1973 and they put that whole record on Shopify, it's not necessarily, when each individual song comes out, it's not necessarily identified as being a part of a larger piece of work.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like we were ripping this apart, and so that we own all these little bits, and you don't know that they're a part of something bigger, whether it's just a record or a tradition or a community or anything.
Sure.
And so that's just that's an example, like without having to go into a lot of the larger, obvious examples about, artist compensation or owner compensation. That's just like, it's not about music. It's just not about music.
Sure.
Do you think that it's purposeful? Lazy? Yes. You think it's purposeful?
I think it's not lazy. It's purposeful because it's dividing. It's basically wanting to get the power out of the listener's hands, out of the audience's hands, so that they have all the power, and they get people, which they have done successfully, to get rid of their record stores as a resource, to get rid of the ability to converse actively with people, to get rid of your own music collection, so that you have to I don't need these records. I've got it. It's all there. Like, it's all there. And then you don't have it anymore.
Yeah.
And you don't understand that a record has a lot more than just music on it. Even I oftentimes return also to, luckily you're working in an industry that so far it can't be reproduced and downloaded.
Correct.
So you have to be here in Kentucky to do certain things.
Yes.
I think audiences are increasingly under the false assumption that music is something that kind of appears out of nowhere and doesn't have any context whatsoever.
Interesting.
And it has so much context in every step of the way, including the marketing. The marketing is a big context, and if it's done in an inspired way and with creativity and accountability, it's not marketing isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
Like marketing bourbon wouldn't be a bad thing, except that it's done like how do we make, what do people want to spend money on? Not like, how do we actually trace it to what's a good reason to buy our whiskey?
Yeah.
But it's just like, well, what would people think is a good reason to buy our whiskey?
Yeah.
I would actually add on to your music metaphor there, where we have, I would say, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 whiskey consumers don't think beyond the bottle that's just sitting in front of them. And it's very interesting when we go around the country conducting tastings, where people are then given a connection back to a geographical location.
Yeah.
And they've never really conceived of that before.
Yeah.
And there's a story I tell a lot, and this will be ideal for you. I took a tour group to Lafroig, and we're with Vicky Stevens, who at that time was managing the visitor centre, and we stood in front of the spirit safe in the still house at Lafroig, watching the new make spirit run through the still safe. And she gathered everybody in the group, and we all huddled around the spirit safe, and she said, every single drop of Lafroig ever sold anywhere in this world has run through that point right there.
Yeah.
And everybody in the group got goosebumps at the exact same time, because the context of it was inescapable.
Yeah.
And I think, as much as, yes, we're not in a downloadable whiskey world
yet.
We are in a go to your local liquor store and pull the bottle off the shelf world.
Yeah.
And I don't think that necessarily translates back to where it came from.
No,
it's a majority of drinkers.
That's another issue that I kind of have with these the big companies, where, it used to be exciting for a variety of reasons to go anywhere and look at a record store or a liquor store. What have they got?
Exactly.
And it's not exciting, and then you go to one and be like, this is a gold mine for Scotch, or this is a gold mine for this kind of record. And it's not exciting to go somewhere and say, well, they have everything. It just isn't. All of a sudden it's just like,
no,
they kind of have nothing.
It's those little honey holes that you find, like, again, just reversing time back when there were record shops, and if you found the right record shop with an owner that gave a shit, you're going in and you're finding stuff that you never even heard of, and Japanese editions, and this odd 7-inch, and this one was printed on white vinyl, like, and then you
can
get
find weird and crazy things, for sure, on Shopify, but you can't then ask somebody to tell you something about where it came from and why it's there, and what came before it and what comes after it.
But the shop owner, a good shop owner, will be able to tell you all about that. Oh, and he was in this band, and she was in that, and now you found another band to go down that rabbit hole and figure out what they were. And it's down to algorithms and
I think we've also entered into that world of the instant expert, and we hear this a lot in whiskey. And Joshua and I got our start in a very similar way, where we were two chaps who simply had access to the internet, who started tasting whiskies and posting notes, right? Just posting reviews, talking about it. Was a passion, right? And I think there's something about going into that liquor store where the person who's in charge of the spirits that are on the shelves is invested in it and has something to say that's of interest. And if you just simply go from liquor store A to liquor store B to liquor store C, and it's the same inventory at every single one, then that's the beginning of the death of something that we're passionate about. And I think we're far enough along now that we've seen that death in the music industry, where the good music store is few and far between.
There's a great one just down the street here. You all can stop by. It's called Guest Room Records.
Oh, nice.
It's really nice, and every business, of course, needs all the support it can get right now. But they're great new and used records, and they have dollar bins outside right now.
That's awesome.
It's like a COVID era add-on to their business model. It's really cool.
COVID wrinkle.
I got a couple of whiskey questions for you, real quick. One, because you were talking to Luke Freud, and I just want to how old is their label? The label itself, because one thing that I always snicker whenever I see.
Sure.
It gives me such glee to see that black and white.
Sure.
Like almost ugly but not quite label, and just to think that somebody at some point has made the decision to not update it or make it nicer or anything like that. Did it begin that way? Was it a commercial choice to begin with?
Yeah. I would say it has to be probably the 70s for it. We've done 70s tastings of Laphroaigs with,
and it looked same.
With that similar label.
Yeah, I mean there've been subtle changes over the years.
When you put them side by side, you see some modernization happening.
Yeah,
there is.
I mean, I know they have all the variations with different little color elements now, but just the basic.
Correct.
Basic one is
because we did a 1970s tasting in Glasgow, and the labels are recognizable as the Laphroaig labels.
It's so cool. Because I remember like designing record sleeves, when we first started, and thinking like talking to the record label, and because the record label that I work primarily in the United States is Drag City, and it's a profit split thing, which means that once we spend all the money starts coming in, and once we start making back money, they make 50%, we make 50%.
Oh, I gotcha.
So I was always thinking like, well, how cool can we make a record sleeve with as few colors as possible, because the printing process is cheaper.
Exactly.
And thinking like, and still, but have it still be, because I love record art, and have it still be great record art.
Yeah.
But, and when I look at the Laphroaig bottle, I just think like, they just nailed it. They're just like, we don't have to spend that little, extra 5 pence a bottle or 20 pence a bottle or whatever, or a fraction of a p a bottle, and it's fine, and it's great, and the whiskey speaks for itself, because it's just all about, it's like saying, don't look here, look inside the bottle. It's inside the bottle, it's not outside the bottle.
I love the I.W. Harper's label for the same reason. It has that nice established history that you can go back to now, 1930s I.W. Harper bottles that are essentially recognizable in that same lineage. Yeah,
but is it black and white?
It's
gold. Yeah, see, that costs money.
Yeah.
So, and then we're drinking this, which is really great.
Thank you.
This rye.
Cheers,
Thank you.
And I've got a niggling question that's bothered me for a little while now. So one of the times in the past 15 or 20 years that I got really excited about a bourbon was the first time somebody, and I think it was about 15 years ago maybe, somebody poured me a Rowan's Creek.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind. I loved it. And for a few years, I drank it, almost exclusively. When I would go and buy a bottle of bourbon, that's what I would buy. And the cork was terrible. Like, it was the most difficult to open. Like, you had a sort of a maker's mark-like thing, but it crumbled. It was dry. It was so difficult to break open. And then at a certain point, maybe about 5 years ago, it started to taste completely different. Not the same. Now, and I was just like, okay, I don't like this anymore. Whatever, no loss. I mean, it's a loss, but I don't care. And it got easier to open as well. But then, some Norwegian friends they were like, please bring me a bottle of Willet Rye. And I brought them a bottle of Willet Rye. I tasted it, and I was like, this is the new Rowan's Creek. This is the same liquor. This Willet Rye is the same liquor as the Rowan's Creek bourbon. What the fuck is up with that?
So, because whether it's Willet or Rowan's Creek, they don't. Well, Willet now distills their own, but they always purchased from other distilleries. It's back to that old American tradition of.
But a rye and a bourbon shouldn't be the same.
They shouldn't taste, but if a distillery is doing its job, then you should find a thread that says, oh, I recognize that. I recognize it from that distillery.
The closest I found to it is the Four Roses single barrel. I think it's single barrel is the one that I like.
Yeah, so that's... But those are always going to change.
At the same time.
Those are always going to change because Four Roses has 10 different mash bills. So you have different amount of corn, different amount of rye, and then different yeast strains.
Yeah.
And so... given the different ratios of grain, along with the different types of yeast, it creates 10 different recipes, 10 different flavor profiles.
Yeah.
So if you're getting the single barrels from Four Roses and you like them, look on the side of your bottle. There'll be like a 4-letter code, like OBSF or OESK or something like this.
Yeah, something romantic.
And that like you can... all the bottles come with like these little Little Orphan Annie decoder rings to let you know what that recipe means. And if you like that recipe, just go to your store and find another one that is of that recipe, and
that's nice to know.
You'll always be happy.
Cognizant of your time, there's a question that I desperately want to ask you, and then if there's a question Joshua desperately wants to ask you. Now, what was the question? As we've talked this afternoon about being pragmatic and responding in a pragmatic way to the world around you, what does the pragmatic musician Will Oldham look like in 2021? What you already oh boy, I've asked too much of a question.
Well, it's a really challenging question, but
like, and so with, because clearly you're a pragmatic chap.
Yeah.
Clearly there's an aspect of romanticism to you, and then there's that aspect of getting at the heart that we talked about earlier. Given that we are in this digital world, what do you do going forward? What would make you happy going forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that I'm actively engaged with now, because I'll say that, in the typical fashion of any practicing musician, we have just finished a record that, I'll just say that it's really strong, like,
I believe
like
you.
What I was going to say, like that it's some of the best work of my life, that kind of thing. But but
it's the one that was just released, or
no, something that will come out.
Oh right,
Won't come out until 2021.
Okay.
I think there might be a song that will come out at the end of this year, but partly because everybody's lost. Manufacturers aren't fully up and running, and distributors aren't up and running, and stores aren't up and running. But even then, it's such a strange. I can't even think of a good metaphor for having this thing that we've made and not understanding what its existence should be, or could be, or can be, or will be, and my relationship to that as well. Will we be in the what's our leadership going to be like in the United States? Will we be allowed to play shows in front of people?
Yeah.
But playing shows in front of people is like, I pragmatically, I like the fact that most romanticism exists because there's a basis for it.
Sure.
And then a lot of people come in and just, take the top layers and say, well, this is everything that it is. And people also look at it, the Shopifys or the Live Nations will just say, like, we see how we can capitalize off of this, and fuck the romanticism, fuck the bottom part. We'll just continue to take the top, and everybody will, if we call it this, everyone will agree that it is this thing. And I've watched that happen, over the course of my life and working in music. And what do you do with a record that you love and is strong in 2021?
But can't go out and personally share it.
Well, because so much of my relationship to music, like, I've always had mixed feeling. Like, I have understood that people want you to play live, and I always take playing live as an opportunity to go out, interact with people, see places, interact with other musicians, have a lab on stage that people can witness. Because for me, there's so much power in recorded music, and there's so much, there are things, being a big Leonard Cohen fan and having seen him play 3 times, I still, from all those 3 times, and it never got close to the depth of the experience that I've had in listening to his recordings. They were wonderful and interesting shows. Yeah. But I don't have, I'm not, I don't, so I think it is a different beast altogether. Like, I don't necessarily feel like there are people like, Ralph Stanley or Jesus Lizard or Dick Gaughan or something like that, where you go and seeing them play, that you witness something very special. And I like to think that when we go out on the road, we make something, but it's just a different thing. Like,
yes.
So we have this record and it's one thing. Playing live is a different thing.
Yes.
Hopefully someone will come and have a great experience at the show, but it's just coincidental that there's also a record, because the record is its own thing, and you're supposed to, like, nowadays also, because musicians get paid much more for playing live than they do for recorded music.
Sure.
They tend to make records more right now, and because records aren't consumed as full things, they're more like calling cards or brochures for what they do, as opposed to being what they do actually. Like, what they do is a live thing. And I think still, like, I still write songs to be songs, I make records to be records, and I play shows to be shows. Yeah. They're 3 different aspects of the same thing. So I don't worry about, I just worry about how will somebody pick up this record, and just think, like, how will they pick it up, and will they listen to it from beginning to end? just because I know that it's good that way. It's not going to, I won't say it's a shame and those were the good old days and these, I just think like this is a good record and, it's like, it's like a good sign painter or somebody who knows how to shoe horses so that for the best all day smooth wagon ride from this village to that village, I can still do it.
Yeah.
It's a shame that I know how to do it, but it's not like I'm lamenting the passage of time or progress. It's just like, what do you do with those emotions? Like, we made this record that's fucking great. And so what?
Yeah.
It's fine. It's fine. It's just like, I'm not going to, I got a daughter. That's great too. And, and I get to sing I can sing either privately or in some way or shape or form every day. Nobody's taking that away from me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what do you do with these things that you make? And it'd be like if you were making great whiskeys and there was a new wave of even of a truly like top to bottom prohibition that was a heartfelt thing in communities, and they were just like, no, we like this, we like these drugs, these pharmaceutical drugs. They're so much better, and everybody agreed, and you were just like, okay, all right. All right, that's fine. We do have this, but that's fine.
We still have this wonderful thing.
Yeah, we do have this
here.
wonderful thing that is undeniably wonderful, but if you try to force someone to drink it, they're not going to enjoy it. They're not going to get anything out of it.
But it's interesting in listening to you. You've taken the role, and just as you mentioned Leonard Cohen here, you've taken the role of being music consumer seriously.
Yeah.
And you've taken the role of being music producer seriously.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've hit upon a disconnect where there are fewer people taking the role of music consumer seriously.
It's, I guess, also knowing that, like somebody who is given a superstore to go in and buy whiskey, they don't understand what they're missing.
Yeah.
And they still get a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
And so what do you do with that? Like, they get a wonderful experience, and you can't deny, like, somebody who digs deep on a streaming service, they're potentially going to have some eye-opening, revelatory experiences that won't necessarily compare to, not only compare, I guess it's losing a relationship to accountability that makes everybody, a stronger and more valuable member of any given community, even your own family. And I think that's it, is worrying, not worrying, but just being aware, that science fiction novels that talk about, docile masses doing exactly what they're told to do is happening. And it's just like, well, just then go back to those books and see what happens next, and and don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's interesting watching my daughters discover music.
Yeah.
And they're discovering music in a very different way than the three of us.
Yeah.
And likely a lot of our listeners discovered music where you had a shop and you had friends that would share music with you, or you had a record store owner that would make suggestions, and somehow you'd find your way down this rabbit hole, and then you'd make friends who had similar interests, and then you'd get even deeper into it. And here we are, we're month 6 into COVID, and we're just staying home with our family.
Yeah.
And so my kids are connecting with their friends electronically. They're creating their Spotify lists, their Apple Music lists, and they'll say, "Dad, you have to listen to my playlist."
Yeah.
And so there'll be these songs, and some of them I'm not really loving, but some of the songs I'm like, I never heard of this. This is fantastic. Do you have any of their other stuff?
Yeah.
Like, no, we don't. We have this song.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's such...
And what can you tell me about it? It's 3 minutes and 37 seconds, and it's called this.
Right. And it's such an unusual way to consume music. And I didn't really want to use that word, but I think that's what's happening. They're consuming that music in that way. But interestingly, and I told Jason this story when we got into Kentucky yesterday. I was telling him a story about my 11-year-old. We were outside, beautiful summer day. We're on the shoreline, just beautiful breezes, just having a great time. And I put on your latest album. And my 11-year-old, and we're listening to it, and she's hula hooping, and we're playing horseshoes. It just became the soundtrack to our evening. And my youngest daughter said, I've heard you play him before. I said, yeah. And she said, I don't know what it is, but somehow he's making old music sound new and good. And I loved that.
Yeah.
I absolutely, she was forced to think about what she was listening to.
Yeah.
Right? It's different than any other thing
Right.
on her playlist. And now she's like, she calls it old music because that's what mom and dad listen to,
Yeah.
right? It's, but I just thought it was so interesting that she made that comment maybe 6 songs into the album.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just the one song. It was song after song after song. And she was listening to music in a different way, hearing it in a different way.
Yeah.
And I'm just hoping that they'll get to that point. I am nervous that people have just changed the way they discover and listen to and share music. That does make me nervous.
At the same time, I think I like that description, that your child gave, because I like the fact that in writing any song or making any record, which is different from most live shows, is that there's always the knowledge that they exist in the future.
Yeah.
I'm writing a song now, but it doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist, or making a record doesn't exist until it's been heard by somebody.
Yep.
And so it's knowing I don't know what will happen with this record, but at the same time, I know that I'm in this card game in 2021 some way.
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to lose my shirt? Maybe. Will I have a great, I don't know, but I know that there's something, and it's just beginning. And it's just, and is it beginning to be a weird faint echo? But it's not about anything past. It's totally this is me trying to participate in the future. That's what each record is.
Yeah.
It's not, it is related to old.
Yeah.
It's related to traditions and other people and work that other people have done and my life up to this point and other people's lives up to this point. But really, it's okay, if we have to live next year or 5 years or 10 more years, this is part of, our armament or something like that.
Okay.
It's about, the records are all about the future.
Yeah.
They're not about.
Yeah.
And it's cool listening to, especially field recordings, and to think they didn't even know that they were making music that was about the future. Mm-hmm. They had no clue because they didn't even know recorded mediums existed really when these songs with this music was developed.
It was only of the moment.
Yeah, but it really was about the future. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Will.
Thank you all.
Really
Very
appreciate
much.
that.
And that was wonderful. Really, that rye was fantastic.
Oh,
Yeah,
good. Glad you like it. Will, thank you so much for spending time with us, for allowing us in your home and on your back porch, and spending as much time as you did, because we know you're a busy guy with many irons in the fire, as they say. It's interesting. You and I, Jason, spent a good hour and a half with him. A little over an hour and a half, but we recorded about an hour and a half of conversation and some music, and there was a song that he sang, and we'll play that a little later on. But for as much time as we had with him, I didn't get to ask nearly as many questions as I wanted to, because he was, I got the feeling he was just as curious about whiskey as we were about him and his music and his process. And
well, what do we tell everybody we line up for One Nation Under Whiskey? This isn't a Q&A session.
Nope.
We're not coming in with pre-prepared questions. We're going to sit down and we're going to have a whiskey chat with you. And in this instance, speaking to a musician like Will Oldham, we said the same thing. We're just coming in to have a conversation. Wherever the conversation goes will be valuable. Mm-hmm. And I think that led to him asking his own questions. And I love that type of back and forth that we can have, which, gosh, if you can't have a good conversation over a good glass of whiskey,
right,
when can you have a good conversation? So
it made me almost feel thankful that I couldn't ask those questions because I'd rather have a conversation than a Q&A session. And I'd rather have the opportunity to maybe speak with him again and ask those questions. And I was going to say that. Day, you know?
Yeah. I don't know if Will understands this, but that felt like a part one. It just felt like the beginning of a longer, larger whiskey chat. So sorry, Will. We will be back on your porch again if the invitation arises.
We shall darken your door again.
Before we transitioned into the chatting portion, we said we would come back and share another couple of favourite songs with our dear listeners. And you started the first two on the front end. I'm going to start the next two on this end. And so my next track is from a 2018 album called Songs of Love and Horror, where Will went through his own back catalogue and rearranged some of his own music and presented it. And so there's a song on here that is, I think, one of his most famous songs called I See a Darkness.
Yeah. Yep.
And the reason that I wanted to select this is, again, not only is it singer-songwriter, not only is it a song that pauses me in my steps so that I can listen to it, not only is it lyric-driven, but this song was covered by Johnny Cash. And oftentimes, and many, many music lovers say this, when Johnny Cash covers one of your songs, it becomes Johnny Cash's song. And you and I were discussing this in the car in Kentucky, that this to me remains firmly a Will Oldham song.
Yes.
And while Johnny Cash does a wonderful, wonderful version of it, I still prefer the Will Oldham version of it. Yeah. And I still return to Will Oldham doing it, even to the point of Will representing it as part of his own back catalogue is still a better version than the Johnny Cash version. And I'm not disparaging Johnny in any way, shape, or form. I passionately love Johnny Cash. But I See a Darkness, as sung by Will Oldham, is as close to perfection as I think you're going to get in a song.
Well, you are my friend, and can you see many times we've been out drinking, and many times we've shared our thoughts. But did you ever notice the kind of thoughts I got? 'Cause you know I have a love for everyone I know.
I love that version so much, Jason. And for those people who also enjoyed it, just in case you want to look for it, whether it's at a local record shop or if you want to download it from Apple or something like that, it's not under Bonnie Prince Billy. It's under Will Oldham, which I found interesting because he doesn't really release many albums under Will Oldham. It's usually Bonnie Prince Billy. So if you're interested in that, it's Will Oldham, and the album title again was Songs of Love and Horror.
Songs of Love and Horror for this 2018 version.
Correct, yeah.
But so you and I were discussing this is from the I See a Darkness album.
Yep, and that's what I was about to say. So the original version came out in 1999, and as I understand
Takes me back.
Right? Takes you back. And I think and I could be wrong, because here we are 21 years later. But I think that was his first album released as Bonnie Prince Billy. I think he went from Palace to Palace Brothers and Palace Music, and maybe there was a Will Oldham release in there, and then it became Bonnie Prince Billy. And I remember getting that or hearing about this album and my friend saying, like, I don't know what's going on with Will Oldham, but now he's changed his name to Bonnie Prince Billy. And it felt like we had to do sleuthing. Like, it felt like wait, is this him? Is it that? And then you hear the voice and you know, oh yeah, that's Will Oldham. Okay, now he goes by Bonnie Prince Billy. That's cool. You know, what you said before, and I want to get to my final track, but what you said before, I thought was it's a well-said remark. When you said, when Johnny Cash covers your song, it becomes Johnny Cash's song. And I think that there are two very clear examples where that statement is very true. So when he covered Rusty Cage by Soundgarden, that became a Johnny Cash song. I still love Soundgarden, but I'm going to listen to the Johnny Cash version over it. And then his version of Hurt by Nine Inch Nails. Now, I
was going to say that one if you didn't.
You know, I have to say, I've got my own prejudices. I have always thought and continue to think that Nine Inch Nails is but he took...
Trent, you're welcome on the show anytime. Anytime.
But what Johnny Cash was able to do, which is what Will was able to do with Wolf Among Wolves, is all of the sudden the lyrics were on a pedestal. And the music behind the lyrics that Johnny Cash put fit the lyrics better than Nine Inch Nails. I felt the pain when Johnny was singing it. I didn't feel the pain when Trent Reznor was singing it. It would, the Johnny Cash version, I feel, is just so much more meaningful. But that's my own opinion. Yeah. The last song that I want to play shows, I think, a bit more of the funner, more fun. Is it funner or more fun?
You Americans, you love the word funner. I never heard the word funner until I moved to the United States. We would always say more fun. But you can have funner. We're in America. It's still you're still free enough to say funner.
Well, I think this is more funnerer. Funnerer? Is that better?
Much. It's more funnerer.
So this next song, I think, is just a fun song to blast in your car and sing along with, and just ignore the world while paying attention to traffic.
Ignoring your children screaming in the back seat.
But this song is, or the clip I'm about to play from this song, the song itself is called Devil's Throat, and it's from his new album called I've Made a Place.
A bad captain won't give out good orders. A bad sideshow won't show good mutilations. A bad emperor won't redraw good borders, oh no. A bad tailor won't make good alterations. A bad ranger won't put out good fires. A bad farmer won't raise what she needs. A bad actor won't announce he retires, oh no. A bad Samaritan can't do a good deed. That's what there is, that's all she wrote. My friends, you won't hear good songs flow from the devil's throat.
I just absolutely love it. It's so much fun to sing along with. I think sometimes he has very poignant lyrics, and I quite often, I like that he'll often sing from the perspective of someone else, right? The perspective of a woman, the perspective of a victim of something. And then sometimes I like it when he's just having a bit of fun. And I feel as if this song he's having a bit of fun, even though some of the lyrics can be serious. There's also a good bit of fun in there too, and I love it. I love it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Getting to share some of this with our listeners. You and I have said it along the way here with different episodes of One Nation Under Whisky. When we do step away from someone in the whiskey industry, and we have the Garth Ennis, the Adol Rafai, the Matthew Rees, the Daniel Whiteson, and now Will Oldham. When we step away, just have another kind of chat, our listeners come with us. Mm-hmm. And just like they trust us on our whiskey selections, so many of them trust us on our guest selections as well. Mm-hmm. And so to those of you who are already fans of Will Oldham, Bonnie Prince Billy, Palace Music, I hope you're enjoying this as much as we are. And for those of you who are hearing about Will Oldham for the first time, I hope you agree that it's been worth your time and that you've enjoyed the chat and the music. And yes, we will return to close out the episode with Will Oldham performing for us and for our listeners on his back porch at the end of this episode.
I want to return to the conversation you and I were having about preciousness regarding bottles.
As do I.
Well, listening back to our conversation with Will, it was very obvious to me that he's concerned about the way people consume music, how they acquire it, how they consume it, and how it plays a part in their lives. And to me, it sounded as if he much prefers people get the full album and listen to the full album. I took it as, if you download a song, well, hopefully that brings you in to listen to more, right? Which is part of the reason why we brought, a guilty pleasure of mine, is that if I'm introducing people to Will Oldham, or if we're introducing people to Will Oldham, that's the hook, that we're somehow bringing people in to that world of Will Oldham's music, right? And so I imagine as a musician, he has that hope. But when you have that hope, you're treating music just as precious as we would treat a bottle number 2, right? If I'm going to open a bottle, or if I'm saving a bottle for a special occasion, I'm not going to drink it alone. I want other people to join in. It has to be momentous, right? And when you're listening to music, if you're doing it properly for the sake of the music, well, you want to do that in a special way too. Like, set aside time for yourself to actually listen. Don't let it be background music. And and I even said in our conversation to Will, that my family were listening to his latest album, and it became the soundtrack to that evening. Well, it's not as if that's the only way I listen to the music or that album or any of his albums, but for that day, it was just the perfect soundtrack to our lives. And we listened to the album all the way through, and my daughters were actively listening to it. It puts a preciousness on music. And I think that's how we have to, that's not necessarily how we have to treat whiskey, but in some cases that is how we treat whiskey, with a preciousness. And if we're going to open that bottle, it's going to be in the right instance with the right people so we can all appreciate it.
Which transitions beautifully to what I was about to say about finishing off a bottle of Ardbeg roller coaster this weekend. Mm-hmm. Right? I had very dear friends over yesterday for social distancing in the backyard to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Ardbeg roller coaster. I pull out for before the end times. Anybody who came to my house, if they liked peated whiskey, I would pour Ardbeg roller coaster for them. Mm-hmm. And so here we are, you and I, recording this special episode about Will Oldham. I've emptied my bottle. Mm-hmm. The roller coaster has come and gone. And just as we were talking about earlier in the episode, I do have more unopened bottles of it to pull out. That's why I enjoy sharing it as much as I do. There will be a fresh bottle of roller coaster coming. Yeah. And so it is. It's good to have precious bottles. It's good to have stories. It's good for me to remember that I was still living in Eastern Washington when it went on sale on the RØDE website. I remember being there at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, waiting for my purchase to load, to process. I probably sat for an hour and a half. It was one of those first releases where the internet crashed around it. And I still managed to acquire 2 bottles. I didn't know until I woke up the following morning and saw my credit card statement that I had actually secured the 2 bottles. Maybe it was an illusion. Maybe the system crashed. Maybe my credit card got kicked offline. But I really did have 2 bottles. And it's been a bottling that I've continued to purchase at auction. If I show you the back of the bottle here.
Oh, yeah.
You can see my name written on the back. Johnston Yellen, 27th auction, 12/13. And it looks like I paid £185 for it at auction. That might be the 185. I don't know. It just says 185 on this back sticker. But yeah, it's something I actively look for and that I love sharing. So, just like you will, and I know when we return for your second daughter's bat mitzvah, we'll open more special bottles. When you come for my youngest kid's second bar mitzvah, we'll open bottles. Fun will be had. That's what it's about.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Should we wake up the paper boy?
Sure. What news do we have to share?
We've got news.
Okay.
Extra, extra! Read all about it! Life story of Playboy Penny! Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it! Me and that Playboy...
This episode is going live on September 23rd. And the news that I wanted to share is Whistle Pig is somewhat in a rear view mirror. We have sold through via lottery our Single Cask Nation Whistle Pig Spirit of Collaboration Tokai finish and then separately rum and vermouth finish bottlings. Very, very well considered by those who got some preview tastes. Will Oldham himself loved the Tokai finish, which was really wonderful to hear and celebrate with him. For those waiting on the next single malt coming out from us, any day now, could have been this weekend, could be sitting in customs, could be the day that this episode goes live. We will be launching soon our first Welsh single malt from the Penderyn Distillery. And we've mentioned it previously on the podcast. It is an 8-year-old in a first fill Grand Cru Bordeaux Barrique. Cask GC2, one of 269 bottles, 59.9% alcohol. I wanted to take a moment because as much as this will be available, Single Cask Nation online, this will be a US membership bottle. This has been our first bottling that Jess Lomas, our global sales manager who resides in Glasgow, Jess was in charge of the bottling of this with our new bottling hall in the south of Scotland.
That's right.
And so you and I, in receiving these, were checking the capsules, checking the synthetic corks, seeing how the labels went on. And it's beautiful. It's everything we've grown accustomed to with our Scottish bottlings. And I've got a little in my glass. I don't know if you have a little in your glass.
Oh, yes. And I've actually, I've been cheating. So
really?
Well, because I finished, because like you, I actually poured a little bit of roller coaster. You inspired me. But then separately, you and I
get that a lot, Joshua.
Yeah. Thanks for derailing me there.
You're welcome.
Like you, I poured a little bit in a separate glass and just let it breathe a little bit. And it is everything I remember it being. Let's give our listeners some notes on this one. You wanna go over the nose, go over the palate on this one? Get people pumped about our first Welsh whiskey?
Let's not belabor the point, but I think it's definitely worth sticking our noses in this. I had jumped, again, because I'd been nosing it while you were yakking away. I had kind of jumped onto the palate of this. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, if you had told me this was a Ben Nevis in some wine cask, I would have believed you. It's got the earthiness across the palate. Yep. It's got that fecundity that we'll often talk about across the palate that I am familiar with from Ben Nevis.
However, and we'll get to the nose. So you're cheating. You're already talking about the palate. So I'm going to cheat as well, but we need to go back to the nose. However, beneath that, and actually before I talk about beneath that, I really think that earthiness is a cask-driven note. Knowing Penderyn, and Penderyn always has this bright...
Correct. I'm glad you bring this up. Yes. This needs to be stated.
Right. Their spirit character is bright, and it's berry-driven.
Exactly.
It's all the red berries. It's all the blue-colored berries. It's all that like fresh, lovely summer fruit-driven kind of spirit. But it's married so well with the earthiness of that Grand Cru Bordeaux Barrique. And there's even this subtle, salty quality coming through that I think is just remarkable.
And do you have any sense of where that saltiness is coming from? Because Grand Cru Bordeaux wouldn't necessarily deliver salty, and Penderyn doesn't tend to deliver salty.
I don't know. But I get it on the nose too. Like when you nose this thing, there's something... Okay, growing up as a Connecticut Jew with some very Jewy grandparents from Brooklyn and Inglewood, respectively, I grew up with salt bagels. And every weekend I'd go to my grandparents' house and they'd get their bagels from Brooklyn. And I would ask for salt bagels. They'd toast it. They put cream cheese, put a little lox on there. But there's this intensity of salt that just amplifies the flavors of everything else. And that's what I'm getting on the nose and palate. You're getting this salt intensity, but it's not overwhelming you. What it's doing is it's just lifting all of the other flavors. It's lifting that earthiness. It's lifting the fruitiness. On the nose, I get this sort of like chocolate-covered espresso bean, and it's just lifting that. It's really remarkable whiskey. It really is.
I'll also say this. We're at the part in the season where our raspberry bushes in our backyard are just giving us more raspberries than we can possibly deal with. Yes. And it's a wonderful, wonderful problem to have. Mm-hmm. And as this whiskey finishes, it's the exact same taste that I get after shoveling handfuls of raspberries into my mouth and swallowing them down. That is... that returns so beautifully. But I want to follow up on kind of a thread that you're delivering here. One of the great comments that we make about our friends at Glenmorangie is their spirit adheres so beautifully to the wine casks that they use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, port specifically.
And again, just last week I was posting on Instagram that I was sitting having fill your own Glenmorangie Marsala cask finish and then separately a Sauterne cask maturation. Mm-hmm. And And the wine just works so beautifully. And there are moments when, port being a great example, where I find port sits like oil and water. Port's on one hand, scotch is on the other. Water's on one hand, oil's on the other. This balance in this whiskey between the Grand Cru Bordeaux Barrique and that Penderyn spirit that you were talking about is just so beautiful. And you and I said this when we selected the cask. Our nation members are going to go bananas for this. This is going to fit the nation palate so well. Yep. So well. And as our first Penderyn that we're putting out there for membership, we're hitting a home run right out the gate. Which is such a beautiful mixed metaphor, right? How to bring baseball and horse racing together.
What I love about just Penderyn in particular, their whiskey doesn't make on paper. Their whiskey doesn't make sense to me from a palate standpoint because they're producing spirit in a different way than any other single malt producer. When you think about Scottish single malt that's double distilled from pot stills, and the spirit comes off the still somewhere 70-75% alcohol, something like that. But Penderyn are using these Faraday stills that are exclusive to them, and the spirit comes off the still between 89 and 92% alcohol. That's really close to grain neutral spirit. And so you would imagine you distill something to that level, to that much alcohol, when you clean it that much, that there shouldn't be oils coming through in the whiskey to calm the heat. But at 59.9% alcohol, this continues to tick probably the most major box that we have, and that's the texture box. This is so rich in texture.
Absolutely.
Right? It just, and that's why I say it. On paper, Penderyn's whiskey doesn't make sense. If you distill it to 92% alcohol, and granted, they dilute it to 63.5, just like the industry does, and they fill the casks with that ABV, but it shouldn't have the oils that it has, yet it retains that good, rich character that we just look for. And so I'm so happy, so pleased, and so proud of this bottling. I'll leave it there.
It's easy to wax lyrical in the news segment, right?
I know.
I'll also add, we shipped the Whistle Pig and continue to ship. We've got 900 bottles going out. The Whistle Pig is going through our Southern California shipper. Mm-hmm. The Penderyn will go through our Northern California shipper. So if you're looking to pick up another bottle of the Blended Malt 10, another bottle of the Stones of Stenness 19, those two bottles will be available when the Penderyn goes on sale. Mm-hmm. Again, we're $10 flat rate shipping. If you want to spread your shipping cost across multiple bottles, you will be able to do that. Mm-hmm. Once the Whistle Pig is cleared through Southern California, we will be launching, and we've talked about it previously on the podcast in the news segment, we will be launching our single malt from Balcones. Yes, and so we have time to taste that and talk about that in a future news segment. Mm-hmm. But know that is sitting in our warehouse waiting to go on sale once we ship through 900 bottles of Whistle Pig. Don't want anybody to think we've forgotten about the Balcones that we had been talking about.
No, I'm so excited for that one too. The last bit of news, and I think we should get out of the news on this one. The other reason that we were in Kentucky, beyond interviewing Will Oldham for the podcast, was to be on our first whiskey business trip. And so it was our friends at Wild Turkey Distillery had reopened for barrel picks. And so you and I both drove to Kentucky. You had about 7 hours up, and I had 13
Like
hours.
7 hours across.
Yeah. And you and I picked 2 new Wild Turkey single casks. And what I'm excited about from these 2 is one of them is just so beyond good. Like, it is just Wild Turkey on steroids. Everything that we love about modern Wild Turkey, and then some. Where the other one is unlike any Wild Turkey that you and I have ever tasted ever. And the best comment that we had gotten, because we were with both Eddie Russell and Bruce Russell, Bruce said, if you put this in front of me blind, I don't know if I'd be able to tell you where this came from. Mm-hmm. Right? And I loved that because, A, it was phenomenal bourbon, but B, it was so off profile that even one of the Russells said, I don't know if I'd peg it. And I love that. I just absolutely love that. And we tasted a sister cask from the same warehouse, and I would say that sister cask it was absolutely remarkable. But this one was off the beaten path, and that's what we were looking for. It was both remarkable and a world of difference from anything we've ever done previously with Wild Turkey.
Yeah, which is it's the ongoing challenge to returning down there, right? Mm-hmm. And if we can keep pulling that off for our members, then we're doing our jobs just fine. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And here endeth the news.
You and I, Jason, started this. Yeah, you and I started this episode differently than we normally do because we said, how is this episode different from every other episode?
And that was all you're doing. I am but a passenger in the roller coaster that is One Nation Under Whiskey.
Oh, look at you with the nod to roller coaster.
Thank you. Pro move.
Because we started differently, I thought we should maybe end differently.
This seems like you have a plan. You didn't bring this up in our production meeting, but okay.
Well, just like Will Oldham came out with an album called I Have Made a Place, I would like to say I have made a plan. And my plan is that we...
Deep dive.
Right? You and I change the way in which we get out of here on the podcast. I would like to hand it over back again to Will Oldham and let him sing a cappella one of my favorite songs from his latest album. And that album, of course, is called I've Made a Place. And this song is called This Is Far From Over. And it's one of the most positive songs on there. But it sounds like you have a statement you want to make before I close us out here.
I want to provide a visual. Right. As you and I were sitting on the back porch listening to Will sing this song, where we already had goosebumps sitting there with this incredible private performance. As he was in the middle of singing this, he pointed upwards, and he had this overhanging trellis with some native honeysuckle on it, and we both looked up, and there was a hummingbird feeding right above our heads as Will Oldham sang this song. And if a perfect moment could get, and you'll like this, even more perfect, it happened in that moment. It was quite remarkable, and I had goosebumps on my goosebumps.
It reminded me of something. And now, I'm not saying this to be political, because I'm not trying to be political at all. But if you remember in 2015-ish, 2016-ish, there was a Bernie Sanders speech. And in the middle of the speech, a bird landed on the podium. and he said, oh, it was this little magical moment that had nothing to do with his speech. It's just the bird happened to land, but it made that speech a bit more magical, I imagine, for people who were Bernie supporters and things like that. And for me, at this time with Will Oldham and that hummingbird flying overhead had the same feeling. It made that our time with Will that much more magical, that much more poignant.
Amen to that, brother. Will we gather up our two chins and mosey on out of here?
Let's do that. Cheers to you, Jason. Cheers
to you, Joshua.
To our listeners. Cheers to the good Will Oldham. And here's to a wonderful and hopefully positive new year for us all. All the best, Jason.
5781, here we come, ready or not.
So yeah, this one was the last song to be written for it, and it's about the future, so it's pertinent. Okay.
Lovely.
So it's called "This Is Far From Over," and we'll see if my mildly whiskey-idle brain can remember the lyrics. Though half of life is gone for good, and we haven't acted as we should, you feel it in your heart of wood that this is far from over. Shorelines gone and maps destroyed, livelihoods dissolved and void, entire languages unheard, and still it's far from over. Be sure and teach your kids to swim and navigate by stars above. The fate of landlocked life is grim if you ignore our will to love. When all that's left is sea and sun, a lonely voice says all's not done. It's your child who will be the one to sing it's far from over. A traveler upon the sea sings, it's a sailor's life for me. I now embrace eternity. Yes, this is far from over. You never know what she will find when we are dead and she is sailing, nor what new thoughts may cross her mind as wind blows in her hair. Don't worry if all life is gone. The rocks and sea will still roll on, and new wild creatures will be born. Yes, this is far from over. The whole world's far from over. That's that one. Yeah.
Oh, tremendous. Thank you.